We already asked you, Lecrae, where you're from. So now we got to ask where you're at.
I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm loving it.
Yes.
You know, it's home. It's like, I don't know. I've lived in a lot of places. This is the place that feels the most like home I've ever been.
That's saying a lot because as we, heard in the first conversation we had, and go back and check that out if you haven't, you bounced around a lot in your adolescence, in your youth, and then even as an adult figuring out the next step. So that's a big statement to say Atlanta feels like home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's massive.
So let's kind of rewind though to earlier on Lecrae. First of all, Lecrae, what does that name mean?
There's two different narratives. My mom says is, she initially was like, well, it's a mixture of your uncle's middle name and like someone on your dad's side. But my dad said I wanted no one to be like my kids. I wanted them to be so unique and original.
Yeah.
And so I gave them all original names.
That's what's up. See, yeah, that makes sense. A little bit of Black Girl magic with a lot of originality, and that's how we get our names,
Exactly.
and the spellings. That's what's up, man. So which came first, your now wife or 116?
Oh. Well, I met her before there was a 116.
Okay.
So I met her as an 18-year-old kid. I thought she was attractive. She was in the Bible study. I wasn't yet converted, but I thought she was attractive, and I was like, man, but she's so Christian. Like, oh my gosh, she's just like by the book Christian. So I was like, I'm a little too much of a irreligious individual for her. So it took some time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So tell us about when, that time elapsed when it was like, okay, I'm ready to step to her.
So what's funny is that I was a curious individual. I didn't know, much about the faith. And I was a pseudo intellectual. So, I want to go to the NAACP meetings. I want to go to everything. And I remember going to a Bible study because I was told to by a friend of mine, and I was like, I'll check it out. And I didn't know anything. I was like, who is Ezekiel? What is y'all talking? And I was ashamed that I didn't know this stuff. And so I kept coming back, and I remember being challenged that, hey man, like you have like a faith, but it's not like a faith that trusts in Jesus. And I was like, oh shoot, I gotta get this. Like, how do I get it? So I kept coming around more and more. And she was just very welcoming. She was just always smiling and just happy. And so there was a conference that was coming up. It was called Impact Conference. And we had to raise money in order to get a charter bus to go to Impact Conference. And so I was like, how do we raise money? What does this mean? And so we were holding signs on the street corner saying, raising money to go to a conference, college students raising money. I was so embarrassed, but she was the only person that was willing to stand on that street corner with me, and she didn't care. Other people were washing cars, doing all kind of stuff, and she was like, let's do it, stand on the corner, and just free-spirited. And so we stood on that corner together, and I think that's kind of like where friendship really developed.
Wow.
Ended up going to the conference. I became a Christian, and really started investigating things. Over the years, we just did Bible study together, and I mean, I'm talking about years, like 8 years. We were just a part of the same campus ministry. And eventually it was kind of like, wait, why am I not pursuing this woman?
Now, what significance or role would you say she's had in the development of who Lecrae is?
Oh my gosh. She's everything, man. Like she's the solidarity, the sturdiness, the consistency. I can be very like impulsive and just rash and just like a masochist sometimes for like, yeah, let's do that. And she's like, hey, let's stop. Let's think. Is that wise? And so, early on it felt like, I don't know, like a strict mom type of vibe. But over the years I've grown to appreciate it. And so she's kept me from making a lot of poor decisions. From, you talking about a kid who came from, this marginalized community and background. single parent home, really dysfunctional. She grew up with a 2-parent household. Her father was a minister. And so she had a sense of structure, solidarity, and family that was just so like beautiful to me. And so every time I was around her, she brought that element. Every time I was around her family, I began to learn more about what this looked like. And so most of the models that I have currently in my family structure come from her family and being around her.
You know, and that's fascinating. One of the things that's cool about you telling that story, especially I'm just picturing you on this side of the street in Dallas with a sign trying to raise money to get to a conference. And that's an origin story. Like that's part of a process. And this person who was next to you, you were feeding off her faith and the strength that she had. And even something that she was filling into your story that you didn't have, that stability. And at the same time, not only were you connecting with Dara, but this other sense of connection and community was forming. You know, tell us about that.
Go to University of North Texas. I'm on campus, and the young lady who I knew from high school says, hey, you should come to this Bible study that we do. It's like, you know, an African-American Bible study called Move/PV. So I go. And I'm like, man, this is very interesting because I don't understand this whole college dynamic. You know, I grew up around, you know, this like huge disparity of like either you are like a thug in the streets or you're a nerd. And so I was like, how does this work? So I'm in college and trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And I get into this campus Bible study and I'm expecting churchy kids, like suits, ties, like just very churchy. And I remember a guy named Mac D and he had like a No Limit tattoo on his arm. And I was like, yo, is this guy a Christian? And over and over again, my mind kept being blown to where I was seeing individuals who looked like me, talked like me, dressed like me, but they loved Jesus. And so, though most of the students in this college ministry were primarily suburban, like kind of like African-American, suburban, like middle class, there was a handful of us that were like from marginalized backgrounds.
The streets, AKA the streets.
Yeah, you know, the streets. And so we kind of gravitated toward each other.
Right.
And, you know, one of them was B.J. Thompson, who no one would ever imagine today. He's like a public speaker and a life coach.
Polished.
Very polished, you know. But he became like one of my closest friends, and we were like as thick as thieves because we had that similar background. Another was Tadashi Anderson, or you know him as Tadashi. Tadashi, you know, was that blend. He was extremely intelligent. I mean, the guy took AP classes as a kid, but he came from this single family situation, lived in a trailer park, like it was rough. So we all kind of like meshed and merged as a part of like, I don't know, it was like hip hop culture. And then you got Sho Baraka, who, you know, is coming from the Inland Empire in California. And like, there was just something there, like a chemistry, like, hey, we all get the college vibe, but there's another side of us that need to be explored as well.
Tell me a little bit about what was attractive to you to like say, I need to go deeper with these guys, especially when rap, and how does rap get into the mix of that?
Well, you know, in the late 90s, early 2000s, you could identify people by what we would call hip hop culture.
Yes.
Right? So hip hop culture was like this overarching culture within the community that oftentimes included a style of dress, included music, included affinities. And so when I would approach them or when I saw them, I said, oh, you're influenced by hip hop culture. Right. And so collegiate culture maybe at this time was more like the polos and the khakis.
Yes.
You know? And but hip hop culture was like, I'm going to class with my baggy tees on and so it was like, hey, you're a part of this culture.
You can see it. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So
and you're wearing like triple XL.
Exactly. Of course, because nothing fit right.
No.
Back in that time period. Matter of fact, if you can get a 5XL, you're killing the game. So it's like, I'm doing big things. So I think that's how we found each other, and there were more of us kind of on the fringes. And we knew coming from the streets and from that kind of background that we had to lay something down for Jesus. We just didn't know what to lay down and how to lay it down. And so initially it's the music, right? Because the music is so influential for a 19, 20-year-old that you're like, yo, I gotta put something else in my ears because all I'm listening to is the regurgitation of everything that I'm trying to step away from.
And who was the initiator of that to say, we should do something with music to express our faith?
The Bible study, the campus ministry, they would do these like freestyle sessions, right, after Bible study. And so a freestyle session would jump off. Most of them were pretty terrible, right? So this is even, I'm new to the faith, kind of, sort of. I'm listening to them and watching them. And
so they're like making beats on tables. People spontaneously, improvisationally rapping.
Yes.
Which is a very hard thing to do.
Right.
Yes.
And you got very nominal college students trying to rap.
Right.
So it was like, oh, cool. They're making they're Jesus raps, and people are trying to talk about their faith after Bible study. And at the time, Sho was at Tuskegee, but he would visit from time to time, his brother. And I remember Sho being phenomenal at rapping, like especially freestyling. It was like, wow, he's really good. And then I remember everyone loved Tadashi because Tadashi could rap so fast. He was just like, I spit it and freestyle.
Right.
Like coming off the top of his head, just making up stuff, but fast. And so I was like, wow. And I just jumped in one of these ciphers. And so it just became a thing. Like after Bible study, like the three of us were like highlighted as the individuals who were going to jump in the cipher and really start freestyling.
And this was something y'all walked into. It wasn't like y'all decided, let's do a freestyle cipher. It was just already happening.
Campus culture. It was just the culture. Yeah.
Okay, so y'all doing this on a regular basis. So when does because at some point it has to pivot to this thing we do after Bible study to let's get in a booth and record a song.
Right. So we all... So while I was in high school, and even after I left high school, I was always rapping. I had a good friend of mine who I would do songs with. We made production. We would record songs and do all this. We wanted to be like Pharrell and like, be big. And he got incarcerated and I became a Christian. And that created a gap between us. And while he was incarcerated, his grandparents let me use all his equipment. So I was in my apartment making music and recording music. And I remember a friend of mine said, Lecrae, God bless his soul, his name is Otis. He said, Lecrae, when you freestyle, you're dope, but your songs are trash. And I was like, well, okay, I got to step it up. And so I remember really trying to step it up. And I went and recorded this song because at the time, the only place I really had to showcase my original songs was at this juvenile detention center that BJ and I volunteered at on the weekends. And so they weren't mad at the song, so I wasn't, but I was like, all right, but my friends are saying make something better. So I went and I created this song called Crossover.
Right.
Everyone loved it.
So tell us about Crossover and what that meant.
So the crazy part about it was I was tasked from a guy who I was doing this Bible study with. So the Hottie had done this men's Bible study called Young Guns, led by the pastor in Denton. And this pastor would take 50 guys every year and take them through the Bible. So I got accepted into this program. I think I was like one of two black people in the program. And I sat next to this guy, and he said, man, you got to meet my guy, Ben Washer. I was like, oh, okay, Benoit. Benoit knows about hip hop. He worked at this sports camp called Kids Across America. He knows about Christian rap. And I said, dope, but where's he at? And then he came through the door. I'm expecting like some hood dude, you know what I'm saying? And I get this like 6'6" white guy, like thin, wearing like Carhartts and like a polo shirt and some New Balance. And I'm like, well, what is this? But he really did know his music. And he knew it because he was a programs director at Kids Across America, which is a phenomenal urban sports camp, Christian sports camp.
Shout out KAA.
Yeah. And he had to come up with the music for those kids. And so he was looking and listening to what they liked and just very intentional. So he knew what was current and what was out. Well, he had tasked me with making a theme song for KAA. And the theme was crossover. And so I was like, well, this one has to be good. You know, so there was a little more pressure than just making songs in my room. It's funny when you make like songs in your bedroom and you think they're dope. When you perform them, usually like the bass is so heavy that everyone just rocks with it. So I thought all of them were good in a sense, but people kept saying something about this song to me, and I'll never forget. Will Reed. He was like a financial advisor who was like serving in the campus ministry just like in his free time, you know what I mean? And he came up to me and he sat me down. He said, hey, Lecrae, just like to talk to you, man. And I'm thinking he's about to give me some financial advice or something like that. He's like, hey, I was listening to Crossover and you really have a gift. You should pursue this. And that was like, it was like a responsible, mature adult telling me to be a rapper. And that it did something to me. It made me say, oh, this song is special. You know, like I need to really do this, you know?
So, all right. So, and it's interesting as this is unfolding, I'm hearing the community. You know what's reminding me of? Like, remember Achille and the Bee when she was like studying for the Bee and they had like even the hood dudes was like helping her.
Rooting
like,
for her.
You know what I mean? Like the whole community got involved. It feels like that kind of community vibe. So once that song hits, how does that impact the rest of Tadashi, Show, you know, those who you're around who are part of this thing that y'all were doing somewhat for fun?
Well, it's crazy because Ben Washer has the idea to start a label and, you know, put out my album first. So I have to make an album, you know, and all I have is this crossover song, you know what I mean? And I thought to myself, I don't know how to make an album. So I was like, I'm just going to get everybody I know who's a part of this campus ministry to be a part of this album. If you listen to Real Talk, my first album, it is full of everybody else. I mean, Represent is me and Tadashi and my man Clinton, God bless his soul, who's chanting on there. You got BJ on Heaven and Hell, you know, talking. You got my man Stephen Carter, who was a part of the campus ministry, singing on the project. You have my wife Dara and my homegirl Jackie doing the interlude for Wait. You got Sho Baraka and another one of our homegirls on It's the Church talking. I mean, it was just all of us on one album because I was like, it's not about me, it's about the community around me. And so it was my album, but it felt more like a compilation album.
Yeah. Okay, so album comes out. Now, tell me about when does 116 you know, get on the scene?
This is how 116 happened. BJ and I were close friends. BJ, I had, you know, kind of fallen away from the Lord. And he saw me at the gym and he was like, yo, ain't you the dude Lecrae? I was like, yeah. He said, yeah, you a part of the Bible study type joint, right? I was like, yeah. This is before all that music stuff, right? And he's like, yo, man, you should come back to the Bible study. And I was like, who are you, bro? Like, leave me alone. But I appreciated his, you know, his candor, his boldness. And I ended up going back to the Bible study. And so him and I became tight because he could relate. We could relate in a lot of ways. Well, I come back and there's Dahadi has this event called a Sea Retreat, you know, seeing everything eternally. And the speaker was William Branch or Deuce from Cross Movement.
Shout out, Ambassador.
Right, Ambassador. And so he was like at the time the premier Christian rap artist. Like he was the guy. So he's speaking and I brought my Bible up to get autographed by him. Right? He doesn't know me from Adam, right? And he signs my Bible and he puts Romans 1:16 inside. And so I look up the verse, I'm like, I'm unashamed of the gospel. It's the power of God. I was like, oh, unashamed. And it's just, you know, I'm telling BJ, I'm like, BJ, this is dope. I was like, bro, we need to like, ooh, dog, we need to be unashamed about this thing. And so it ignited something in me in terms of like a verse that told me to be bold. And so I grew up around gangsters and thugs who were bold about their gang, who were bold about their like, yeah, I represent, you know, I'm gonna throw the gang signs up, but they were bold about their gang, and I felt, if I'm honest with you, therapeutic moment, I felt I was less a man because I chose a different route. I felt I wasn't a man because I chose to go a different way.
Yeah.
And this was my chance to say, oh, I'm still about this gang life, but in a different way.
Right.
And so we went to Hobby Lobby. We got some iron-on letters, and we called ourselves 116 Click. And there was at the time it was CLICK, 116 Click. We didn't know how to spell click like a group of people. And it was initially just me and BJ. Wow. And we would just go around campus with the 116 Click shirts on, sharing the gospel with people. We would go to the hood. We would go to like the clubs, and after people got out the club, we shared the gospel. People talked to people, and people spit in our faces, and we were like, "Yeah, we got persecuted for Jesus. We out here, man!" And
wow,
and that's really how it really began, and then it just got contagious. It was like, yo, BJ and Lecrae are like some hood Christians. But they are really about this life. And people started tagging along, and people who kind of identify with us rocked with us. And so then it's Tadashi and, you know, lots of other people who didn't rap were rolling with us.
See, and that's interesting because I don't think a lot of people know that 116 started before music.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important distinction. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, all right, so that you guys are being known as those dudes out there sharing their faith, you know, all of that. So when does it become a thing? Because then there's the compilation that comes out. Like, so connected to that.
Yeah, so I think because it was already like a group within a group. Like you got the campus Bible study, you got this little group of 116, right? It's like all the little hip hop dudes.
The radical.
Yeah, you know, so we're in there. And the group within the group. And so we're like, yo, let's make a compilation album with everybody, because there's so much talent, you know, in this whole situation that we have. And so let's make a compilation album. And so, you know, Show was always on the fence. You know, Show's like the contrary. He's like, 116 Click. I don't know. I'm Show Baraka. I'm gonna meet Show Baraka. You know, I'm Show. I don't, you know, but he loved the idea. You know, and he loved the passion, and so, you know, he entertained us, and he was like, yeah, I'll do this dance with y'all. I love y'all, brothers. You know what I mean? And so he contributed, but he represented with us, you know, and he appreciated what we were doing, and then eventually he's like, nah, you know what? I'm a part of this. You know, this is my tribe as well, and it was just trying to highlight everyone's gifts.
Yeah,
you know, I'm a huge catalyzer, so I thrive when I see other people taking their gifts and like going crazy. So I couldn't wait to put everybody on a compilation. And I was like, yes.
Okay, so I love that, you know, you kind of described Show as a contrarian, which anybody who knows Show knows that that's true. Like, fill out the rest of the roster in terms of the personalities and the characters.
Okay, I mean, you have Show, who is the contrarian, who's kind of like, hey, you know, I got my own kind of perspective, and what if we tried this?
Right.
And if everyone,
but what about this?
Yeah, if everyone likes it, something might be wrong with it. You know what I mean? That's Show. You have Tadashi. Tadashi is the processor. So he's like bold and like powerful, but he's also like gentle in processing. So he's like, let's think about this, and let's and you know, it's like very well informed. And you have to always remember with Tadashi, yes, he grew up in the trailer park and played football, but he's also an AP student. Right. You know, so there's that dual side to him that you get. Then you got Trip Lee, who was, you know, the kid at the time. You know, he was a 16-year-old kid. Yeah. I call him the sponge because he has this unique gift of being able to take information, digest it, and make it his own. Like that. Like I remember spending months going through this systematic theology series. And then I finished it, and I was like, yo, Trip, you should check this out, man. You know, I'm trying to disciple him, and like, yo, you should check this out. And then like 3 days later, he's like, yo, you got anything else? I was like, you finished it? He was like, yeah, I already finished that. I was like, tell me what you learned. He could spit it all.
Wow.
And so he was like the sponge, and we just knew he was special, you know? And
Yeah, at
so as far as the
16, I
artists,
mean, that's
yeah,
amazing.
all 16,
Yeah.
17 years old.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and BJ's piece too, because you
Yeah.
know he was clearly a
Well,
part.
yeah, BJ is like, it's funny because BJ is always like, in hip hop terms, like if you're familiar with hip hop, BJ is the Flavor Flav,
The hype man.
You know, he's all the personality, and like he's like, I have a voice that needs to be heard. And at the time, it was only through rap, and so it's kind of like that wasn't his thing. But now, as we've matured, he's realized I don't have to just rap for my voice to be heard. So
Wow. So all right, so this ensemble now also on the compilation there's Thistle, J-Son.
Oh yeah. Can't forget Thizzle and J-Son. So the crazy part about that was, you know, with Cross Movement, you know, they were kind of elite. Philly rap was elite in Christian rap, you know? So it's like,
Shout out Philadelphia.
Yeah, they were the elitists. You know what I'm saying? We were just these podunk Southern boys, and they were like, yeah, you know, they cool and everything, but you know what I'm saying? I mean, they theology, you know, it's like, you just look down their nose at us, you know what
Which
I mean?
was the whole East Coast vibe toward the South in general at that point.
Yes,
I
for
must
sure,
confess.
for sure.
Yeah.
So, you know, but we were still like puppies, like we loved them. We went out, do they like us? Do they like us? Does he like me? And they had signed Flame. And so it was like, finally, somebody that we can connect with. And Flame was just like, hey, I'm down with everybody. And so
St. Louis. So
Louis,
Midwest had more of a kinship
Southern
to the
exactly.
Right.
So we connected with Flame, and you know, Flame was like a brother, and then through Flame, I found out about Thizzle and J-Son because they were all from St. Louis and they were his friends. And so I remember pulling up, you know, to St. Louis for a show. And I didn't, unbeknownst to me, Thizzle had actually booked me for some kind of program. And so that's when I really got to meet them all. And I was like, oh, they're like us, you know, like do-rags and baggy jeans and hood stories. Like this is our type of people, but they love Jesus. Right. And we were really getting like seminary level theology poured into us, and they weren't. So we saw it as our responsibility to like, whatever we got to eat, they got to eat. So we would drive, like we take a caravan of like 10 people from Denton, do mission trips in St. Louis, take all the ladies and the fellas down there and bond with them and just be in the hood. You know, like some of the suburban kids from our ministry was like, is that crack? Oh my gosh. You know, so all that to say, Jason and Thizzle became like extended family.
Yeah.
And it was like, yeah, we're all part of this big family. J-Son was the very like aggressive, passionate, like in your face, like, dog, if you don't trust Jesus, you dog, it's a wrap for you, you know. And Thizzle was like the hustler, you know, it's like
the tales that he would tell.
Oh man.
And paint the picture for you. All right, so you put out this project, which, you know, I just remember being one of those Philly hip hop elitists being like, man, these guys are actually bringing heat.
Yeah.
What was the response and the reaction? And when did you know 116 was not just this little thing that was a subset on campus, but something that had identity and resonance with people?
I've always been a catalyzer. Like, I've always been like, hey, how can we make it bigger, better? How can we put, like, inject something into the culture? Like, and I knew, yes, the East Coast was on top, but I lived in the South. And every time I turn on the radio, it's Lil Jon and everything else. And all my friends at the club, I knew what they were listening to. So I was like, no one's making music for them from God's vantage point, you know? So I knew it was a matter of time. I just didn't know it would be us.
Wow.
You know what I mean? I knew this music needed to be made. Right. And so initially I was just doing it for folks on campus. And then it was like, I guess I'm doing it for folks in Dallas. I guess I'm doing it for folks in Texas. I guess I'm doing this for folks in the South and the Midwest. I guess I'm doing this for the USA. And it just kept expanding. And we didn't know. It was like there was not like a moment for us because it kept happening. We were always shocked and we loved it. You know, someone was like, hey, will y'all come to Indianapolis for a show? And we were like, yeah. They was like, all we got is $100. I was like, BJ, they got $100 for us up there. Maybe we could sell some CDs. Me and BJ jumped in a car and drove to Indianapolis from Texas. And
for $100. You can't even get there. That's not even gas money. Well, man, that's amazing. So because one of the things that I think what I'm hearing from you is that oftentimes people think of the story of Lecrae, but as you tell it in this context, it's really the story of a community.
For sure.
Not just, for sure. And that's how you saw it. And like you said, you got as much enjoyment from catalyzing the thing or mobilizing as you did from seeing you get particular success.
Yes.
So let me ask you this then. So we're going to fast forward.
Yeah.
Because, you have a line in Restored where you say, you're talking like from the devil's perspective, he's trying to, discourage you. Said you had fake faith, starting to race bait. Now I can't even take dates. Right? So I'm curious about what that line meant and the response and the reaction toward you meant for the entire group.
Oh, man.
And the 116, because essentially the very identity of what you were known for, being unashamed, was actually being challenged and questioned.
Yeah.
So telling me about that part of the story that people don't often think about.
It's so wild because people from the outside looking in, when all of the racial tension was happening in America, continues to happen in America, people were like, yo, why are all the Christian rappers tripping? You know what I mean? Like in their mind, they're thinking that there's some kind of Christian rap convention and we're sitting down and we're like, hey, let's all agree on these
first order of business.
Exactly.
Trayvon.
Exactly.
Right.
So what they weren't realizing is that we're a community and we're a family and we're all experiencing the same collective trauma together. And so sometimes it's not even a sense of like, I told him I was going to do this and I told him I was going to, it's like, we're just moving out of what we feel called to do. And I think it gave me more courage to be very bold and to go against the grain because I wasn't the only one. I was taking a lot of the public beating and losing money and all of those particular things. But I knew at home my friends were grieved, were traumatized, were contemplating quitting their jobs, were struggling with their churches, and like it was a world that was happening all around me. And so it was what my music was just cathartic for everyone. It wasn't like this is just something Lecrae is dealing with. It was like, no, this is what the community is dealing with. And so there were constant gatherings at each other's houses and constant wrestles and constant grieving and crying and mourning and struggles. And it wasn't me in a silo. It was, now I will say this, we didn't all agree, right? We all agreed there was a problem.
Right.
We didn't all agree on how we should address it, right? And so that caused some tension, in the community, but we all loved each other and we're family, so we figured out ways.
And one thing I hadn't thought about before, but you talked about these mission trips that you and these groups of people were taking to St. Louis. That's Ferguson. So how did the murder of Mike Brown and just that whole situation impact you in light of the fact that this wasn't conceptual for you? Like, you've been there.
Yeah, so this is the crazy part. I think I live in multiple worlds. Some of my friends really just live in a Black context, right? So I live in multiple ethnic spaces all the time. So the tough part was that I thought I was going crazy because all my friends who lived in these predominantly Black contexts were like, yo, this is injustice, this is crazy, this is wild. Look at this, look at what's happening, especially my friends in St. Louis. They're like, yo, this was on the front lines. He was out there at the protests, everything, right? And yet, when I got around predominantly white context, it was crickets. It was silence. And so I'm like, maybe I'm tripping. Maybe it's not that deep. Maybe it's nothing, because it was silence. And I was like, yo, am I tripping? And then when I bring something up, it's like, don't break the law, And so it's like, maybe I am going crazy,
Mm.
and it really was a tough time for me. And so for me to speak out was to really go against the grain of, like, I knew it was going to cause a rift over here, and I
Right.
knew it was going to be a struggle, but it was like, I'm seeing this,
Right.
and I can't deny what I'm feeling, and I can't deny when I'm in my context, these realities that are happening. And so that was a tough time, but we worked through it together.
Yeah. So in terms of even the challenges, because that was just the one part, the political dynamic, but then there's also the music approach, philosophy of ministry, which specifically relates to this unashamed thing, right? Like, how did that impact the communal identity? Gravity comes out, church closed, all of a sudden, oh, they used to be unashamed, but now they seem to be ashamed.
Oh,
How did that, when they're, y'all got tats, 116, it's like on your skin.
Right.
How did that impact y'all as a collective to all of a sudden have a backlash where people are challenging the very identity that you had developed?
We thought it was going to die. Like, we really were like, yo, this thing's got to just die. This whole 116 thing, because it's too closely related for us to a political agenda, And so sometimes terms are not helpful, right? Like, evangelical began to be more of a term that caused dissension and contention than it was helpful for identification, right? And so it's like, I don't know if it holds the same weight as it did 20 years ago. Like, now it feels like it's more of a political term than a Christian term. Right. And so for us, it was feeling like
culture war type dynamic approach.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we were like, man, is 116 more of a political agenda, a theological camp than it is like about being unashamed of the gospel of Jesus? And that's what it was feeling like. Okay. And so no one wanted to represent it anymore. No one wanted to wear the t-shirts internally, right? No one wanted to be about that because, and we had already been struggling with that. Like, if you notice, like, even some of the unashamed tours, it was like, we want to be unashamed of being forgiving. We want to be unashamed of all the aspects of who Christ was.
Now, and the response to that was, see, look, they changed their mission.
Exactly.
And you're saying something like, so just give me in a nutshell why that analysis of the shift in, or, in definition or, expression of it was not about why was that misunderstood?
Yeah, it was misunderstood because we wanted to expand upon, not do away with. We wanted to give clarity that being unashamed of the gospel was not a self-righteous, arrogant, motto.
Right.
It was more about being unashamed to be identified with a Savior who is gracious, loving, kind, gentle, understanding, empathetic.
Right.
And the gospel transforms us into walking in his footsteps.
Right.
That's what we were trying to communicate.
So clearly something happens because, 2016 Trip drops Still Unashamed, which kind of feels like, oh yeah, that there's a reclamation act going on. But that's just, him and Tadashi was on that. Like, has there been a sense of a point in which that has been reappropriated and absorbed? And if so, and expanded, what does that look like now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it took a lot of internal conversation. I mean, there's definitely some people who left, and internally, like, not like artists, but some people who said, I can't rock with this anymore. I feel like it's been co-opted by a political or culture war agenda. And they said, I have to move on. Some great people that were a part of building everything. But there were some of us internally who were wrestling and processing, and we processed together and we pushed back on each other, and we kept thinking through stuff. We sent articles and scriptures and process and say, you know what, man, this verse is still true. And being unashamed is like, this is a part of it, right? Like, this is a part of what it looks like to be unashamed, is to deal with the blowback and the misunderstanding. I mean, they killed Jesus off of a misunderstanding, right? And so it reignited a fuel in us to say, you know what, man, like, Christ is still the center of our joy, even in the midst of the grief and the mourning. And so we're still unashamed. Matter of fact, we're more unashamed because he just carried us through the darkest of times.
That's dope.
Yeah.
So that's a great turning point too, because the other, I think, framework that's been expanded hasn't just been the word unashamed, but even I think essentially the gospel itself. You've started to be involved in many more things. Tell us about the expanded work and how that relates to an expanded understanding of the gospel.
Yeah, so the expanded work is really it's still being a catalyzer, right? It's still, if you think about it, Brian Rich talks about a cross-shaped gospel where, there's a vertical aspect of the cross, but then there's also a horizontal aspect. And the vertical is how we relate to God, but the horizontal is how we're relating to other people. And so for me, there's a sense of like, how am I supposed to relate to other people, right? Is it simply just to, share a message, or is there a sense of bringing what Christ bring, which was peace, which was shalom, which was a picture of an upside down kingdom where the first will be last, the last will be first. It was a sense of transforming culture. I think the gospel, there's gospel implications, right? And what are the implications of the gospel? How does it transform us? Well, it makes us do better business. It makes us care about the marginalized. It makes us create opportunities for people to thrive. It looks out for people. And so for me, I'm like, okay, let's begin to do some of these things. Well, how do we do these things? How do we create opportunities where there are none? Some of that is in the business realm. How do we help in the educational fields, and how do we? And so the long way I put it is I remember being on a flight and I was watching Ben-Hur, and in the story of Ben-Hur, obviously he's this Jew that's now participating in these chariot races that were frowned upon by the Jews, right? The Romans had these chariot races. Well, he starts competing and then he ends up winning. And the Jews who were frowning upon him were kind of like, well, shoot, I mean, a Jewish guy won, And they go to the Roman emperor and they say, man, I'm so sorry, man, the Jews have won a chariot race. And the emperor says, I don't care. Like, as long as they're playing our game, that's all I care about. Wow. And so the empire is only concerned with us playing the game. The kingdom is really what we should be after, is kingdom over empire. Empire will crush you in order to win. Kingdom says, how do we all thrive and paint a picture of, thy kingdom come, thy will be done.
I was going to ask you, what's been theological or biblical framework that helps you see the value of a kingdom framework of the gospel as opposed to, I guess, an individual or empire one?
Yeah, I mean, you can look at everything that God was doing in the Exodus, right? They were under a sense of empire in Egypt, consistently, and that's all they knew, and that's how they functioned. And God had to take them out of Egypt, put them in the wilderness before he could put them in the promised land, because it's like, how do I get this like empirical ideology out of you and help you have a picture of a kingdom, of a family? And so he rescues them and then gives them commands, right? He doesn't give commands first and then rescue. So it paints a picture that, hey, we're not here trying to earn our way to God. It's like God is going to rescue us, and then he'll instruct us on how this thing should work. And those instructions are about community, are about not coveting what each other has. Like, how do I celebrate this person for what they have instead of coveting the things that they have? How can I create opportunity and space? And it's just a sense of working together for something bigger and more eternal, for a promised land that's to come.
That's so good. So that's an interesting way to put it. So essentially, by looking at Egypt, which was the largest empire, which exploited people, which was why, and that's related. You get to be that large by exploiting humans, trafficking in them, and making them do what it takes to build your wealth. And so you're saying God rescued them from that situation and then gives them a set of principles and laws that undermines the very situation, which is why he said, remember you were slaves in Egypt, so now be kind to the foreigner. Remember you were slaves in Egypt, so give everybody rest.
Yes.
Remember you were slaves in Egypt, so allow the poor to glean from your fields.
Yes.
So all of that comes out of this sense of, I'm going to go from empire to kingdom.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. And so we're always looking back at that. And, Christ is constantly painting a picture back at that reality. And that's why he could challenge the Pharisees in a way, because they knew those stories. They knew the Torah. So it was like, shoot, I can't argue with him on this, And so he's constantly painting that picture of who's your neighbor, of, taking care of the poor, even like him extending himself to folks that they would say, what are you doing dealing with these people?
Yeah. So let's take that into what you're doing now, right?
Yeah.
And maybe, because you've made some news recently with the original hip hop track contest. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that and how that relates to this idea of kingdom.
Yeah. So essentially, I've always been enamored with marginalized communities, and just like, I come from this. Who's going to care about these people, And the incarcerated population is one of the most marginalized because no one cares about them, right? They've already made their mistakes. Pay your debt to society. People are not realizing that there's individuals who are incarcerated who are waiting trial. They haven't even been convicted yet, and they're still being mistreated. There are individuals who are incarcerated that did not commit the crime, And so you're writing them off and lumping them in with people who may have done some terrible things. But what the gospel should compel us to do is forgive even those who've done these terrible things. And so we've always tried to do things, visit the prisons. Restoration was released in prison before it came out for the world, And so when we did that, then we said, hey, what else can we do? So we, worked to create a program where we'll let their voices be heard because they're so talented in there. And so it's like, hey, let's create a contest where they can create submissions and we'll put their song out, and all the proceeds go back toward organizations that serve the prison population, like Prison Fellowship.
Man. So you're actually doing a competition, where those who are incarcerated get to contribute and make songs.
Yeah.
And you've, and those songs get evaluated by who?
Morris Brown is the music department in Morris Brown. They evaluate and let bring it down to the top 25, and then I come in on the top 25 and say, all right, which one? And then I'm gonna jump on the track with the top song.
That's amazing. And I don't know if you thought about this, but in the context of our conversation when we started, you talked about how the very way that you got equipment and started doing the song in the first place was your friend was incarcerated.
Didn't even realize that.
Who was obviously talented.
Yep.
And now this thing comes full circle where you're giving opportunity for people who are incarcerated.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Your career starts by you realizing you're good because of you visiting juvenile detention centers.
Right.
Now you're giving them an opportunity.
You want to know what's really wild? This is really crazy. This is how you know some supernatural stuff going on. I don't even know. My first mixtape where I first heard rap ever in my life was at a halfway house. My mom worked at a halfway house. And one of the people who was transitioning out of prison slid me a tape and said, yo, little man, check this out. And it was the first time I heard like hip hop for real. Wow. And I listened to all those songs. It was like LL, Beastie Boys, Run DMC. And I was like, what is this?
Wow. Yeah. So that's what put you on. And when you think about all the talent and the ability that people have forgotten about, but that's there, that's incredible, man. So, well, last thing, we can't have this conversation without asking, well, what's next for the 116 Click? What's next for Unashamed?
Yeah. Well, obviously, we're working on a feature documentary that's highlighting everything that we have done, that we are doing. And so I'm really excited about that. Some phenomenal people involved in that. I've created with some of my good friends a production company called 3 Strand. So 3 Strand is helping produce this project as well. So that's exciting. Yeah. And then I'm always working on music.
Why the name 3 Strand?
3 Strand, a 3-strand cord is not easily broken. Straight out of Ecclesiastes.
So that sense of who in this context, who are the three strands?
Me, my buddy Adam Thomason, and Ben Washer.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it goes back to the community
Back
again.
to the community.
All right, I want just one last thing, because, you know, in the context of 20 years of being involved in this space, you know, everybody makes mistakes. You look back, you know, missteps. You kind of allude to that in some of the music.
Oh, yeah.
What's something that, as you look about the kind of either inception or some of the shifts, you know, 116 or Unashamed, that you, if you look back, you would, man, I wish I had a do-over on that.
That's a good question. I mean, I think there was a season around Anomaly, you know, where I really began to rise, and, you know, #1 album in the country, right? Winning Grammys, where I did allow a sense of individualism to take over.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, the voices that were around me consistently, I did not bring them in as close as I should have, you know, during that season of time. And it's because I thought I was breathing new air. I was like, well, you guys don't understand what it's like, you know, hanging out with, you know, Beyonce, guys. It's just rough out here. You know, it's a different kind of ministry, you know. So I think that the pride of life, man, in that season of my life, you know, it's funny because people look at, like, All Things Work Together as like, oh, you're falling, you're going left. And it's really like, no, I was left when I was doing everything, when I was complying with everything that the Christian standards said. I was just hiding it because it was self-serving. It self-served me to just say Jesus' name a million times, even though internally I was struggling. And so All Things Work Together was me saying, look, I can't fake this thing. You know, I got to be honest. And so I think I would have pulled in my community more during that season if I could do it.
Yeah, that's what's up. Yeah, facts, you were going through some things.
Yes.
You know, it made for a great song, but it was like, wow, that came from a place. But, well, I'm so glad to hear that you kind of had that restored, and then you're also paying it forward and restoring others. Thanks so much for joining us again, my man.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you.